You think he doesn't feel. You think the silence means he walked away, that he doesn't care, that he forgot. But what you don't see is that the divine masculine is drowning in what he cannot speak. Every pause hides a storm. Every delay conceals a war. Every silence is filled with the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. He suffers, not because he doesn't love you, but because he does. He suffers because the depth of this bond terrifies him more than losing anything else in his life. And so he hides. He breaks in silence. He transforms where no one can see. Silence is not absence. It is the crucible where the masculine is stripped bare, forced to face his shadows, and prepared for union. Why the masculine hides his suffering in silence. On the twin flame journey, one of the greatest mysteries for the divine feminine is the silence of her masculine counterpart. It feels like abandonment, like rejection, like indifference. The feminine wonders, if he feels what I feel, why doesn't he say it? Why doesn't he act? Why does he vanish when the connection gets too real? But the truth is, silence is rarely a sign of lack of feeling. In fact, it is often the opposite. The silence of the masculine is where his deepest suffering hides. The divine masculine has been conditioned his entire life to carry weight alone. From childhood, he was told to be strong, to suppress emotions, to never show weakness. He was taught that his value came from performance, results, control, not vulnerability. So when he meets his feminine and feels a love so powerful, it shakes his entire identity. His first instinct is not to share it. His first instinct is to retreat, to hide, to suffer where no one can see. Silence becomes his shield, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares too much. He doesn't know how to voice feelings of this magnitude. He doesn't know how to admit that he is terrified of failing her, terrified of not being enough, terrified of being exposed in his raw truth. The silence is not emptiness, it is a crucible. Inside it, he is wrestling with shadows that words cannot contain. What the feminine often cannot see is that during these moments of withdrawal, the masculine is battling an invisible war. He fights the weight of his karmic ties, relationships he knows are false, but still struggles to leave. He fights the expectations of family, society, and the image he has built for himself. He fights the voice of shame that whispers he will never measure up. And he fights the pull of the connection itself, which terrifies him precisely because it is undeniable. When the masculine suffers in silence, he often looks detached on the surface. He may appear to move on, to distract himself with work, friends, or even karmic partners. But those who can see deeper understand. These are not signs of indifference, they are coping mechanisms. His silence is his attempt to control what feels uncontrollable. His retreat is his attempt to breathe in a fire that feels too intense to handle. There is another truth hidden here. Silence is often the masculine's initiation into awakening. Unlike the feminine, who tends to process emotions openly, the masculine processes through solitude. In silence, he is stripped of distraction. In silence, he can no longer pretend. In silence, he faces the truth of what he feels, even if he never says it aloud. This is why so many masculines break down during these phases, because the silence doesn't protect them, it magnifies what they've been running from. The feminine feels this silence as absence, but in reality, the silence is full. It is full of longing he cannot voice, love he cannot admit, and fear he cannot confront without being undone. He stays quiet not because he has forgotten, but because he remembers too much. Not because he doesn't care, but because he cares in a way that terrifies him. The masculine hides his suffering in silence because silence is the only place where he feels he won't be judged, won't be exposed, won't lose control. But ironically, it is also the place where his suffering grows so heavy that eventually he has no choice but to change. Silence then is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of his transformation. For the feminine, understanding this truth is crucial. His silence is not a verdict. It is not rejection. It is not the end. It is the space where he is breaking, so that one day he can emerge real. The question is, will she collapse into fear when he withdraws? Or will she hold the field steady, knowing that what looks like distance is actually the fire of awakening? Because when the masculine hides in silence, he is not walking away from her. He is walking straight into the storm that will one day lead him back. If you could step into the inner world of the divine masculine during his silence, you would not find emptiness. You would find a battlefield, a constant, heavy war between the man he has been taught to be and the soul he secretly knows he is. And this battlefield is not external. It is carved deep inside of him. The masculine carries an emotional weight that is invisible to most people around him. Outwardly, he may look functional, going to work, handling responsibilities, laughing with friends, even appearing detached in relationships. But beneath the surface, his silence is filled with burdens that he rarely, if ever, speaks aloud. One of the heaviest weights is the expectation of strength. From an early age, he was told not to cry, not to falter, not to depend on anyone. Vulnerability was labeled weakness. And so, when he feels overwhelmed, his instinct is to hide it. He internalizes his struggles, locking them away, believing that no one would understand, least of all the woman who has triggered every hidden wound inside him. He thinks he is protecting her by not speaking, when in truth, his silence is only isolating him further. Another weight he carries is the fear of failure. The divine masculine knows, on some level, that his feminine sees him beyond the masks, beyond the persona he shows the world. She sees his soul, and that terrifies him because it means he cannot hide. He fears failing her, fears not being enough, fears that if she truly knew the depths of his doubts and flaws, she might leave. This fear gnaws at him in silence, making him feel safer holding it inside than risking exposure. Then there is the burden of karmic ties. Many masculines remain entangled in situations that drain their energy, relationships, jobs, or family obligations that do not align with their truth. He often stays because he feels responsible, guilty, or trapped. These karmic cycles weigh heavily on his spirit, but instead of admitting the suffocation, he suffers quietly, convincing himself that this sacrifice is necessary. His silence is his way of surviving what feels like impossible choices. But perhaps the heaviest weight of all is the intensity of the connection itself. The bond with his feminine is unlike anything else he has experienced. It awakens him, excites him, but also terrifies him because it dismantles every illusion he has built. With her, he cannot pretend. With her, he cannot escape. The love is so overwhelming that he doubts whether he has the capacity to sustain it. And so, rather than risk failure, he chooses silence, not because the love is absent, but because it is too present, too consuming, too undeniable. In silence, the masculine often turns to distractions, overworking, numbing through substances, shallow relationships, or endless scrolling and noise. But these only deepen his suffering because no matter what he tries, the bond is still there. The feminine is still felt. The connection still pulls at him in dreams, signs, and synchronicities he cannot escape. This creates an even greater emotional tension. The harder he tries to bury the bond, the stronger it resurfaces. The feminine often interprets this silence as rejection. She feels abandoned, unloved, invisible. But in truth, the masculine's silence is filled with love he doesn't know how to express, with longing he cannot admit, with shadows he cannot yet face. He suffers not because he has turned away, but because he doesn't yet know how to turn toward her without collapsing. This emotional weight is why he suffers in silence. He believes speaking it out loud will make him weak. He believes sharing it will burden others. He believes no one would understand, and so he carries it alone until the weight becomes so unbearable that silence itself becomes the teacher. Because silence is not just absence, it is the mirror of everything he cannot yet say. It is the place where he wrestles with his fears until he realizes that breaking down is not weakness, but the first step into truth. And this is why the feminine's role is so powerful during his silence. Not to chase, not to fix, not to demand, but to hold the frequency steady, to trust that his silence is not the end, but the crucible of his transformation. Because inside that silence, the masculine is not forgetting her. He is breaking open for her. How karmic cycles amplify his silence. When the divine masculine retreats into silence, it is rarely just about the feminine. More often, his silence is amplified by the karmic cycles that entangle him. These cycles act like chains around his spirit, making him feel trapped between who he is expected to be and who he truly is. And while the feminine interprets his silence as distance from her, in truth, it is often the loudest sign of the war he is fighting inside. Karmic cycles take many forms. Some are relationships, connections with partners he knows are not aligned with his heart, but which provide comfort, stability, or a sense of obligation. He may stay because he feels guilty, because he fears hurting others, or because he is afraid of being alone. In these relationships, he often feels suffocated, unseen, or misunderstood. Yet instead of leaving, he hides his pain in silence, convincing himself that enduring it is easier than confronting the truth. Other karmic cycles manifest as family expectations. Many masculines feel pressured to live up to the roles assigned to them: the provider, the responsible son, the man who keeps everything together. These expectations weigh heavily, especially when they conflict with the calling of his soul. He may stay silent because speaking his truth would mean disappointing those who depend on him. So he buries his needs, pretending everything is fine, while internally the weight grows unbearable. Work and societal roles also form karmic chains. The masculine may cling to jobs or careers that give him validation but drain his spirit. He may define his worth by money, status, or achievement. When the feminine's energy awakens him to deeper truths, these pursuits lose their meaning. Yet, instead of admitting the emptiness, he often throws himself further into them, using busyness to drown out the inner voice. His silence grows, not because he has nothing to say, but because he cannot yet say what truly matters. All of these karmic patterns amplify his suffering. They create noise around him, making it seem like he has moved on, when in reality he is stuck in cycles of fear and duty. Every time he chooses silence over truth, the cycle tightens its grip. Every time he avoids confrontation, his suffering deepens. His silence becomes the language of avoidance, the only way he knows how to cope with the unbearable pressure of living a life that is misaligned. For the feminine, this is deeply confusing. She feels the bond so strongly that his silence feels like betrayal. She sees through the karmic ties, recognizing their emptiness, and wonders why he cannot do the same. But what she cannot always see is the shame that binds him. The masculine often stays silent because he knows deep down that he is living a lie, and admitting that truth feels too heavy. He fears judgment, not only from others, but from her. He fears that if she saw the depth of his entanglement, she might lose respect for him. So he suffers quietly, caught in the tension between love and fear, truth and illusion. But there is a paradox at work. The very karmic cycles that amplify his silence are also what eventually shatter it. The weight becomes too heavy. The lies become too obvious. The emptiness becomes too loud. The longer he hides in silence, the more unbearable the cycles become, until collapse is inevitable. Silence, then, is not a sign that he will stay stuck forever. It is the pressure building before the breakthrough. This is why silence is not rejection. It is the crucible where karmic ties burn. His suffering in silence is his soul's way of showing him what cannot continue. And though the feminine may not see the process, she feels its echo. The restless energy, the sudden waves of longing, the intense dreams. These are signs that the karmic cycles are cracking under the pressure of truth. Ultimately, karmic cycles amplify his silence because they magnify his inner conflict. But they also serve the higher purpose of driving him to the breaking point where silence no longer works. When he finally chooses to speak, it will not be half-truths or excuses. It will be raw, undeniable, and real. And that moment of truth is often closer than the feminine realizes, because every second of silence is not him forgetting her. It is him being broken down by the lies that keep him from her. Why silence does not mean rejection, For the divine feminine, the silence of her masculine is one of the most painful experiences on the twin flame journey. She feels the bond so deeply, so undeniably, that when he retreats, it feels like abandonment. She begins to wonder, did I imagine this connection? Did I make it all up? If he really loved me, why would he disappear? These questions cut like knives because silence to the feminine feels personal. But here is the truth she cannot forget. His silence is not rejection. Silence is not the absence of love. It is often the proof of it. The masculine withdraws not because he doesn't feel, but because he feels too much. The intensity of the bond overwhelms him, and instead of stepping forward, he pulls back to regain a sense of control. He is not rejecting the feminine. He is rejecting the mirror she holds up to him, the mirror that exposes his fears, his wounds, and the lies he tells himself to survive. When the masculine goes silent, it is usually because he is entering a crucible. He hides because he cannot yet articulate what he is going through. He hides because he is ashamed of his struggles, his karmic entanglements, his doubts. He hides because he fears that showing his vulnerability will cause him to lose the very woman he loves most. Silence is his armor, and while it looks like indifference, it is actually the sound of a man trying to hold himself together when everything inside of him is falling apart. If you could see beneath the silence, you would feel the longing. You would feel the way he thinks about her constantly, the way her presence haunts his dreams, the way songs, numbers, and signs remind him of her at every turn. The silence is not a void. It is overflowing with love he doesn't yet know how to express. It is heavy with emotions that words cannot contain. The feminine interprets silence as rejection because she equates communication with connection. For her, words are lifelines, reassurance, proof that the bond is real. So when the masculine offers nothing, she feels cut off, invisible, forgotten. But the truth is that his silence has nothing to do with her worth. It has everything to do with his inner war. He is not saying, "I don't love you." He is saying, "I love you so much that I don't know how to handle it." There is a paradox here. His silence hurts her, but it also refines her. It pushes her into sovereignty, into the realization that she cannot depend on his words or actions to validate her truth. She must anchor herself in the bond she feels within, not in the behavior he shows without. This is why silence is so powerful on the twin flame journey. It forces both counterparts to grow. For the masculine, it strips him down until he can no longer avoid the truth. For the feminine, it anchors her deeper into faith and self-trust. And here is what the feminine must know. If the masculine truly did not care, there would be no silence. There would be no push-pull, no tension, no signs. Indifference is clean. It leaves no echo. But the masculine's silence is messy. It is charged. It vibrates with energy that refuses to die. That is not rejection. That is proof of a bond so real it terrifies him into hiding. Silence, then, is not the end of the story. It is the space in which the masculine is broken open. It is where he wrestles with his shadows, where he learns that avoidance does not make the bond disappear, where he finally realizes that no amount of silence can erase what his soul knows to be true. For the feminine, the key is to stop interpreting silence as abandonment. Instead, she must see it for what it is: his battlefield, his crucible, his initiation. His silence is not him walking away from her. It is him walking straight into the fire that will one day bring him back transformed. So the next time the silence feels unbearable, remember this truth. If he truly rejected you, you would feel emptiness. But what you feel is intensity, longing, tension, connection. That is not rejection. That is love in disguise. That is the silence before surrender. When the divine masculine withdraws into silence, the feminine feels it like a wound. Every day, without a word, seems to confirm her worst fears: that she is not loved, not seen, not chosen. Yet what she often does not realize is that her role in this silence is not to chase, demand, or try to pull him out of it. Her role is far greater and far more powerful: to hold the frequency steady, to remain the anchor of the bond while he learns to confront his shadows. Silence is the masculine's crucible, but it is also the feminine's test. It asks her, can you trust what you feel without needing external validation? Can you remain rooted in your sovereignty while he collapses in his illusions? Can you love without losing yourself in his absence? These are not easy questions. They strip her down to her essence, forcing her to find her strength not in him, but in herself. The feminine's role during his silence is first and foremost to stand in faith. Not blind faith in fantasies or timelines, but deep faith in the truth of the bond she feels in her soul. Her ability to hold this knowing without collapsing into fear is what keeps the connection alive in the energetic field. If she abandons herself in doubt, the field destabilizes. But if she holds her center, the masculine has a stable ground to return to when his silence finally breaks. Secondly, her role is to embody sovereignty. The silence is not an invitation for her to shrink, but to expand. It is the universe's way of reminding her that her mission, her growth, and her light do not stop just because he is quiet. In fact, this is the very time she is meant to step more fully into her power, to pursue her passions, deepen her spiritual practices, nurture her body, and live as though she is already whole. Because she is. When she does this, she does not just survive his silence. She transforms it into an opportunity for growth. Her sovereignty also breaks the cycle of dependency. Many feminines, in the early stages of the journey, respond to silence by reaching out, chasing, or trying to prove their worth. But the silence after an eclipse, after karmic cycles have been burned away, is different. It is a call for her to prove to herself that she no longer needs to cling, that her identity is not tied to his validation. Her calm detachment in this phase is not indifference, it is power. It communicates energetically, I know who I am. I know the truth of this bond, and I will not collapse into fear just because you cannot yet speak it. Another key role of the feminine during this period is to hold compassion without enabling. Compassion means she sees his silence not as cruelty, but as suffering. She understands that he is battling demons that words cannot contain. But compassion does not mean excusing toxic behavior or tolerating mistreatment. Her job is not to rescue him from his silence, but to honor herself while trusting that he will emerge in his own time. She can send love energetically, hold space in meditation, or pray for his healing, but she must not abandon her own boundaries in the process. Energetically, the feminine is the keeper of the flame. She holds the vibration of unconditional love that transcends words. When she maintains her alignment, the masculine feels it, even if he never says it. In dreams, in signs, in sudden waves of emotion, her steady presence reaches him. It becomes the rope he can grab onto when his silence finally cracks open. This is why her work in silence is so important. It shapes the field that both of them will eventually share in union. Finally, the feminine's role is to see beyond appearances, to not take silence at face value, but to recognize it as a phase of alchemy. His silence is not his absence. His withdrawal is not his rejection. His distance is not the end. She is called to see with spiritual eyes, not physical ones. To understand that in the unseen, The connection is alive. The bond is working, and transformation is underway. This does not mean she waits passively. Quite the opposite. It means she steps into her mission, into her joy, into her expansion. It means she lives as though she already knows the outcome, because she does. Deep down, her soul has always known that this bond is eternal. And it is this knowing, carried with sovereignty, that becomes her greatest contribution during his silence. So the next time the silence feels unbearable, remember this: the masculine suffers in silence, not to hurt you, but because he doesn't yet know how to share his truth. And your role is not to rescue him, but to embody the very love he is learning to accept. By standing in your light, you do not just endure the silence, you transform it into the bridge that will one day carry him back to you. The silence of the divine masculine often feels endless to the feminine. It seems like a void with no sign of change, a wall that will never crack. But silence is never permanent. It is a phase, a crucible, and eventually it begins to break. The masculine cannot remain hidden forever, because the bond pulls him forward, stripping away his defenses until he has no choice but to step closer to truth. The key is to recognize the signs that his silence is not rejection, but transformation, that awakening is near. One of the first signs is shifts in his energy. Even if he does not communicate directly, the feminine begins to feel his presence differently. Dreams intensify, sometimes nightly, with him appearing more vulnerable, more open, or even reaching out. She may wake up with his emotions coursing through her body, as though the silence is no longer empty, but charged with his struggle. These energetic waves are not imagination. They are signals that his walls are beginning to crack. Another sign is increased synchronicities connected to him. The feminine may suddenly hear his name repeatedly, see numbers linked to his birth date, or encounter songs and messages that feel like his soul speaking. These synchronicities are not random. They are evidence that the field between them is becoming more active. The masculine's silence is breaking because his soul is pushing through, even if his words are not yet ready. A powerful sign comes through his behavior in the physical world. The masculine may not fully return, but subtle actions reveal his inner shift. He may resurface briefly, sending a message after months of distance. He may check her social media, like a post, or linger in ways that show he is still watching, still connected. For some, the masculine appears unexpectedly in person, drawn to the feminine's energy even without understanding why. These small movements are not insignificant. They are the cracks where his silence begins to crumble. Another indicator is his restlessness in karmic cycles. If he is entangled in a karmic relationship or environment, the feminine will sense his growing frustration. He may express dissatisfaction with his job, argue more in karmic partnerships, or withdraw from distractions that once consumed him. The very cycles that held him captive start to lose their grip. Silence grows louder inside him, forcing him to admit that the life he is living is not aligned with who he truly is. This restlessness is the prelude to awakening. Emotional leakage is another clear sign. The masculine may not say much, but his energy betrays him. He might appear tired, drained, or unusually emotional when glimpsed in the physical. He may break down in private, releasing years of suppressed feelings. The feminine often senses this collapse through waves of unexpected sadness or longing, as if she is carrying emotions that are not her own. This is not coincidence. It is the bond, revealing that his silence is breaking because he can no longer contain the truth. One of the most undeniable signs is his inability to fully detach. No matter how silent he becomes, he always returns in some form. He may disappear for weeks or months, but then suddenly re-emerge, even in the smallest ways. His silence is never clean. It is always laced with threads that keep pulling him back. This cycle of retreat and return shows that the bond is stronger than his fear. The silence is breaking because it cannot hold against the pull of destiny. Finally, the deepest sign of all is the feminine's inner knowing. She begins to not just hope, but certainty. A calm truth arises within her that says, "He is shifting. He is awakening. He is on his way back." This inner knowing is not fantasy. It is her soul reading the bond, recognizing the cracks in his silence before they appear in the physical. The feminine's intuition becomes razor sharp in these moments, showing her that awakening is already underway. The silence of the masculine is heavy, but it is not eternal. When these signs appear, the dreams, the synchronicities, the restlessness, the subtle returns, the emotional leakage, they are the universe's way of saying, the silence is breaking. The transformation is near for the feminine. These signs are not an invitation to chase or demand, but to prepare, to hold steady in her sovereignty, to anchor her light, to be ready for the moment when his silence finally gives way to truth. Because when the silence breaks, it is not a slow trickle. It is often a flood, and the masculine emerges not with half-truths, but with the raw, unfiltered reality of what he feels. His silence does not last forever. It is only the pause before the awakening, and when it cracks, the love that has been buried beneath it will be undeniable. On the twin flame journey, silence is often misunderstood. To the divine feminine, it feels like a punishment, like abandonment, like the cruel confirmation of her worst fears. But in truth, silence is not the end of the story. Silence is the initiation, the sacred fire that refines both counterparts until they are ready to meet in truth. For the divine masculine, silence is where he suffers, breaks, and awakens. It is the place where he can no longer distract himself, no longer hide behind masks, no longer avoid the bond that demands his transformation. In silence, he wrestles with his shadows, the fear of failure, the burden of karmic ties, the weight of expectations. In silence, he realizes that his old life cannot survive, and though he may appear distant, cold, or detached, the reality is that silence is reshaping him into the man who can finally stand in union. For the divine feminine, silence is the crucible of sovereignty. It forces her to let go of dependency, to anchor in her own power, to trust what she feels beyond what she sees. It asks her to stand firm when everything in the physical seems to collapse. In silence, she learns that her worth is not defined by his actions, that her truth does not waver with his words, that the bond is eternal whether or not he acknowledges it. Silence refines her into the anchor of unconditional love. The paradox of silence is that it feels like emptiness, but it is full. It feels like distance, but it is intimacy. It feels like death, but it is rebirth. The masculine does not withdraw because he rejects her. He withdraws because he loves her too deeply to show up half-formed. And the feminine does not endure silence because she is forgotten. She endures because she is being prepared for the union that requires her strength. Silence is the fire before the light, the storm before the calm, the breaking before the breakthrough. It is the initiation that neither counterpart can bypass, because it teaches them the very qualities they need to sustain union: patience, faith, sovereignty, and unconditional love. Without silence, the connection would remain untested. Through silence, it is refined into something unshakable. So if you are in silence now, do not despair. Do not interpret it as rejection. Do not assume it is the end. Instead, see it for what it is, the sacred process by which both of you are being prepared. Trust that the masculine is not lost in his silence, but being reborn through it. Trust that your role is not to collapse into fear, but to rise in faith. Because silence is not where the story ends. It is where the real story begins. It is the initiation into the love that cannot be shaken, the bond that cannot be erased, the union that cannot be denied. One day the silence will break, and when it does, you will see that it was never empty at all. It was always the space where the universe was working, shaping, and preparing both of you for the reunion your souls have always known was coming. Silence is not the end, it is the initiation.